It's time for another rose tutorial, and this week I am tackling the neo-traditional rose. And neo-traditional just means new traditional, so it's an updated version of the classic. And neo-traditional artwork is just utilizing more colors and a little bit more attitude to the artwork. So using what we learned last week as kind of our base, we're going to just add on to that a little bit more and make it just a tiny bit more dynamic. We're going to add some more color, and yeah, it's going to be really cool. So go ahead, grab your pencil, and let's get to work. What I did was I started with a circle, and mine's a little bit oblong, but that's cool because I want it to be a little bit taller. Once I'm done with the circle, I've sketched the frontmost petals, and I've got one going across the center just like we did last week, and then I've got one that's falling underneath. It's kind of cradling the inside of the rose. Now let's add some more petals. So the ones that I'm doing right now are the ones that kind of hug the center of the rose, which is called the pistil. And the spiral portion that is showing right there is called the stigma. And so when I say stigma for the rest of this, I'm referring to the spiral portion in the center. The reason that I went with a spiral this time is because it's a good base. It allows you to know exactly where the center is, because if you follow the stigma straight down, you end up at the calyx, which is not a term that you need to know, but it's important to be a little bit educated on the artwork that you're doing. So with a rose, its structure all starts from a single point, the calyx, and everything grows out from there. So when you're drawing, if your petals are too far to the outside, it's noticeable because all those petals should originate from that center point. So if it helps, go ahead and draw that line that goes straight down and hits your base. Put a little star there, or maybe scribble a little circle and fill it in. But if you know exactly where your center point, where your growth point is, then it makes the structure a little bit easier to manipulate. But enough about the center of the rose. Let's talk about these cupped petals that go around the outside. I'm going to do a little example for you. They don't have to be one specific way. You can kind of decorate them however you want. And the beauty of it is that you can make a neo-traditional rose kind of however the hell you want. So long as you're using clean, bold black lines and things remain somewhat flat. I am, of course, referring to colorations, which we'll dive into a little bit later in the video. But for right now, let's talk about these petals a little bit. So I like to draw kind of almost like a half circle, and I'll put a little point to the end of it. That point is more of a reference for me than anything. So as I'm sketching it in right now, you can see how I'm using that center point in conjunction with those reference lines that I drew earlier. Figure out how you want your petals to overlap, and once you've got everything kind of dialed in the way that you want it, you can go in and refine a little bit further. So I've just added a couple of little bite marks from bugs, and I hooked that front petal just a tiny bit more because I think that it looks a little bit more appealing. Really take the time with your sketch and make sure that everything falls into place the way that you want it. Because once you get beyond this, especially if you're on paper, it's really difficult to take back something. So at this point, I am happy with where I'm at for my rose design. So I'm adding in the leaves around the outside. And here's a little reference. I'm just trying to kind of figure out which type of leaf I want to go with. And here's some examples of the way that I've drawn them in the past. And this one's a little bit more new school than what we're looking for, but I really like doing these serrated leaves. They're I don't know, they just look badass. So I'm just gonna sketch it in real quick and show you what they could look like, but maybe we'll use that for the Nu Skool drawing. And of course, you can throw some little veins in the leaves. But that's enough messing around. Let's get serious. So for this project, I am simply going to make my center line, bring a point off that line, and then kind of make a little bit of a curve going back. The backside of the leaf is going to be pretty much the same. It's going to get rid of that center point, and it will be a little bit concave on the top, but it's about the same width, and it just kind of gently curves back the same as the front side. Now, you can draw your leaves however the hell you want, but this is just how I'm going to do it. Because it's relatively simple, it's easy to reproduce over and over without actually tracing over the leaf to make them perfect. And it will leave enough space at the end of this to put the color transition that I want to in here. Now, the way that I color is going to be a little bit outside of the realm of neo-traditional, but hey, if people want to judge me on it, then they can make their own tutorial videos. At this point, I'm just going to start lining this thing. The big thing here is just make sure that the lines are black and clean. And you can get away with various line weights in this, but for me, I think that just a thicker line is more appealing, and it's easier to read from a distance. I think that's enough talking for now, so let's go ahead and speed this up because I'm pretty sure that outlines are very straightforward. Here's a little part of the drawing that I didn't quite like after I got it all lined out. So because I'm on the iPad, so what? I can get away with this. But if you're drawing on paper, you kind of gotta live with mistakes like this. And if you don't like something, either you dedicate yourself to it or you start over. And I've been there plenty of times and it sucks. So let's go ahead and do some veins in these leaves, and once we're done with that, we get to move on to some color. So let's go ahead and bring up our palette. So these are the colors I plan on using: greens, teals, and I will put a little bit of orange at the tip of the leaves, which is fun, but it's one of those things that people are gonna be like, oh, that's not neo-traditional. Well, fuck off. It's the way that I like to do it, and yeah, it makes it more fun. For those of you who are using Procreate on the iPad, first of all, congratulations on your purchase. It's a super good move. Anyways, when using Procreate, you can select the areas that you want to fill in. So long as your outlines are closing off the area completely, you can select the area. Oh, this was the part where I decided, I don't like these teals. Anyways, you can select the area and just drag from the upper right hand corner where your little color selector is right into the area that you want your color to be, and boom, it's like a paint bucket tool on Photoshop. And that's how I like to operate. Just drag and drop, or you can just hit fill layer. And let's talk a little bit about the way that I'm coloring now. When tattooing, I almost always work dark through the medium tones and into the light ones. But for this, I'm starting light and then I'm bringing it through my medium tones and then up to black. So the reason that I'm working in reverse is just because I want to keep my layers minimal, and Normally, if I was doing this for like a real project, I would have probably 4 layers per petal, but I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible, and so I'm doing it all on 1, maybe 2 layers, just to keep everything kind of split up. I like to use this ink wash brush that I've got, and it's not something that is standard on Procreate, but you can hop online and find it. But you can use your airbrushes if you want. Soft airbrush works great, but what I find is that if I'm using a brush that is perfect and smooth, then I will sit there and go over things dozens of times just to make sure that everything has that perfect transition, like it's a gradient on Photoshop. But with something that's imperfect, it allows me to just kind of go a little bit quicker, because I don't have to worry about making everything like absolutely perfect, and you can't see where one color starts and one color ends, because it's meant to be a little bit distressed looking, and it's a really neat look, and I think that it is beneficial to have that in the finished product, because then it doesn't necessarily look like it's digital. It kind of looks like you may have done it with marker, and I used to work with marker, so it looks great. Here's another example of kind of pushing the envelope and what is neo-traditional and what isn't. So there's going to be artists out there that say that because I'm not using black line work, that this is no longer neo-traditional artwork, that it becomes illustrative, which is fine, and it might be true, but the idea here isn't to define what is and what isn't neo-traditional. This is more about just kind of spicing up the artwork and taking a very common tattoo image and making it new, making it more modernized. And yes, if you want to call it illustrative, then great, go ahead. But it is a graduation from traditional style artwork. And next time we'll take that even further, and we'll get a little bit obnoxious with it. Okay, so my rose is pretty much finished, minus the highlights, which I'm going to knock out right now. So the way that I approach highlights is a little bit odd and totally not necessary, but it's an approach that I really like. So what I did was I added a new layer, and I'm going over top of the areas that have all these lines. And I just kind of slop some paint on there, and then I trim it with my eraser tool. Once I've got it trimmed and at the shape that I want it, then I'll go through with my eraser again, but I will take it from a sharp airbrush to, or correction, I will take it from a hard airbrush to a soft airbrush. And once I have the soft airbrush, I will just barely brush over top of it really gently and lighten all that down. And it just kind of makes it look a little bit glossy as opposed to like a hard white highlight. So I know that I'm talking a little bit about it before we actually get to the point, but you'll be able to see my steps in just a second. So I've still got quite a ways to go on these highlights. So I thought it'd be a good time to talk about the differences between tattooing this image and doing it digitally. So there's a lot of stuff that I can do on the iPad that I'm not going to be able to accomplish on skin. And if you're familiar with my work, you might be like, you know what, like, that's bullshit, because I've seen what you can do on skin and it looks great. That would be because I favor saturation of colors way more than line work. So all these lines in the petals, yep, they're gone, they're donezo. So instead of doing those, I would just make sure that I packed as much color into those petals as possible to make them stand out. Time to do some leaves. Now with this, I like to do something that's a little bit different. So those are my colors that I'm going to be using for this, and obviously I'll use black as well, but I've got those 3 greens that I'm going to start with the lightest green, bump it up to the medium, and then again to the dark green before going to black. Then on the opposite end, on most of them, on the opposite end, I'll put a little bit of that orange, and it just really makes it stand out. If I wanted to make it pop even more, then instead of orange, I might have used violet, which is a tertiary color, as is teal, as is amber. So you get the 3 of them together, and pow! It just really jumps out at you. The same goes for like primary colors, blue, red, and yellow. You use those together and you're going to have something that's visually striking. Same goes for those secondary colors, green, purple, and orange. It's what I like to call the trifecta, and you will see it a lot in my artwork because I fucking love colors. But too much color can be overpowering, and you never want to do that. So that's a whole nother thing, and I don't have time to discuss it because I'm at the end of my artwork. And I'm just going to put a little shadow in here. Thank you for watching. I, of course, am the Tattoo Robot, and please join me next week for the 3rd part of my rose tutorial series, where I will go over the Nu Skool version of the rose. Please click like if you think that you got something of value from this video, and of course, subscribe, because that'd be awesome. Thank you.